Well, morning everybody. I think we should start at time and then people will join. It is hard to put 2,500 years of history in 1 hour lecture. So basically we should change the name. It should be called The History of Moroccan Judaism on One Leg. Because we are really doing a brief summary. In any case, we do know... Okay, I'll wait for people to join for a moment. No, please do. Yeah. Okay. So as I was saying, we are doing one leg history of Moroccan Judaism. So, there are some traditions that some of the Jews came here immediately after the destruction of the first temple. Possible, not really so probable, and definitely not provable. So we can't prove it. Provable. You can't prove it. However, though, we do know of Jewish presence in Mauritania after the destruction of the second temple. Then, now Spain and Morocco are really, the history of Spain and Morocco is really intertwined, right? So sometimes Spain is conquered from here and sometimes Morocco is conquered from there. But those two pieces of land really share a lot of history. So you know how the southern part of Spain is called, right? Andalusia. So what do you think, from which ethnic group that name comes from? The Vandals. The Vandals, right. So the Vandals came here also. And we do know that at the time, more or less 429, during the Vandal domination of the North Africa, there were church councils organized here, local church councils, right? Not universal church councils, but local North African church councils. And one of the ideologies those councils needed to take care of or to struggle with was Judaism. Then later in 534, Northern Africa was taken over by Byzantine Empire, and then Justinianus, the emperor, passed decrees against all kinds of Christian heresies, including Judaism, or in addition against Judaism also. All of this is much more attested from external sources than from internal Jewish sources. We do know that at that time, because of missionary activities of Jewish expulsees from the Second Temple period, some of the local Berber tribes converted to Judaism. However, though, this was general biblical monotheistic Judaism, not necessarily the rabbinic Judaism the way we know it. That's why, probably, the Jews and the Judaized Berbers were not extremely literate. So we do not have, Jews who came to live amongst the Berbers, and then Berbers who accepted Judaism from them and became Jewish themselves, were not extremely literal, right? So we don't have too many written sources from within the Jewish community. The Muslim conquest starts in 662 by Sidi Uqba. He was one of the Ashab. In other words, he was one of the Muhammad's contemporaries. And his grave is, until this very day, venerated by local Muslims in Tunisia. There's a huge mosque, and it's called Sidi Uqba. So this Uqba guy, he started the conquest. In 674, he created a new city, which basically was a military campus, and that's where the name of the city came from, Kairouan, right? So Kai in Persian languages is just like war in English. So Kairouan would mean basically a military camp. Now this place will prove to be extremely important for the entire area and then for the Jews also, and we are getting there. In any case, 704, Muslims are taking control of most of Northern Africa. They returned the original name, Ifriqiya, right? And the Arab province of Ifriqiya is established. The first military commander is Musa ibn Nusayr. And this Musa ibn Nusayr had a secondary, let us call him that way, Tariq ibn Ziyad, who was a very ambitious young man who conquered Spain. But he conquered Spain without consulting his immediate commander, Musa ibn Nusayr. And Musa ibn Nusayr never actually consulted the Caliph. So when the Islamic conquest of Spain was undertaken, it was based on private initiative and endeavor, and both of them were reprimanded by the Caliph, because who needed opening yet another front? Now, you know Gibraltar. So Gibraltar is basically called after Tariq, Jebel Tariq. In other words, the mountain of Tariq, the private conqueror of Spain. Now, here we are entering a clumsy territory of Kahina. There was a lady called Dahya. We don't really know how to pronounce her name. She was obviously a Berber. Arab sources called her Kahina, which makes immediately the Jews think of her as of a priestess, because Kohen, Kohenet, Kahina, right? These are the same words. However, though, in Arabic, Kahin in masculine and Kahina in feminine basically means a sorcerer, a soothsayer, a magician. So this doesn't necessarily, her Arabic nickname doesn't necessarily, or the way she was called by the Arabs, and she herself wasn't even aware of that, doesn't necessarily disclose anything of her religious beliefs. In any case, when North Africa was conquered, most of the local population were Berbers. Some of the Berbers converted previously to Judaism, other Berbers converted to Christianity. Overwhelming majority of Berbers stayed shamanist, animist, certainly not monotheist. Okay, so during the Islamic conquest, Islamization of certain Berber tribes occurred. Later, it was these Berber tribes who used Islam to conquer other Berber tribes and to subjugate them to their own rule. The idea is very simple. According to Islamic law, monotheists of previous versions of, let me put it this way, to make it really understandable in 21st century. The Muslims saw themselves as Vista Windows, right? Windows 7. They thought of Judaism as of DOS, you remember that operating system? And they thought of Christianity as of Windows 3.11. Now what happens if you still have, I'll explain. If you still have a computer which runs as its operating system Windows 3.11, and then you called Microsoft, even if you have the private number of Bill Gates, it doesn't help, because he will tell you, yes, it is our program, but there is no more support for that, right? We came with with better versions. So Islam is basically saying Judaism and Christianity were God-given programs, God-given operating systems, but they were suppressed. They were never suppressed in terms of that God abolished them, but God doesn't give support for them anymore. So you don't have to go and vandalize anybody's personal computer and to remove DOS or Windows 3.11, but people who prefer to keep running them just need to know that they are marginalized and there is no support, divine support for their programs. This idea is called the Pact of Umar, right? There were 4 caliphs, and in Islamic world, they tend to see that period as with very idealistic eyes. So they see it as Arcadia, as a harmonistic period in time where you have to strive to return. However, though, out of 4 caliphs, 3 were assassinated, right? Abu Bakr was not, but then Umar ibn al-Khattab, and then Uthman, and then Ali, they were all assassinated. Now, why is this relevant? Because in the time of the 2nd Caliph, Muslims, Umar ibn al-Khattab, Muslims have already conquered most of the old world. And they needed to create a precedent, or they needed to create a modus vivendi, or to invent the way they will rule Christian majority. I mean, Arabic tribes who conducted the conquest were tiny minority in their newly established empire. So, the Pact of Umar is basically saying that Jews and Christians living in Islamic territory can proceed having their own synagogues, churches, monasteries, but they cannot build any new. Why? That was the idea in the 7th century. They really believed that Judaism is passé and Christianity is passé, and you don't have to actively suppress them, but they will die out in a century or 2. Obviously, this didn't happen. But this is very important for us to understand that Jews and Christians could afford not to convert to Islam, because they wouldn't be killed. Unlike the Berbers, which were not Christian or Jewish. A Berber who was an animist, a polytheist, a shamanist, according to Islamic law, he could be sold to slavery immediately. His property could be immediately taken over by the Muslims. And that's why Berbers didn't really have many options. So they started converting in huge numbers. Now, just in order to make a bigger picture clear, how did the line of Islamic rule over the Middle East, over the old world, went through? So we have 4 caliphs after Muhammad, right? As I said, Abu Bakr, Umar ibn al-Khattab, Uthman, and Ali. At the time of Uthman and Ali, the Muslim community split into 2 different communities who are striving to take prevalence until this very day. The Sunni and the Shiite, right? Okay, so the family from which the 3rd Caliph came is called Bene Umayyah. Uthman was killed. Ali took over. Then Ali was killed. And then the power returned to Umayyads, right? So the Caliph, in other words, the vice-king, because the king of the world is God, and the Caliph is his vice-king. In other words, he's his shadow on earth. Okay, so this position was controlled or dominated by Bene Umayyah. By the middle of the 8th century, after the conquest of the North Africa already, there was a revolution in Islamic world. Another family took the caliphate over. So, the capital of the caliphate of Banu Umayyah, was in Damascus. Then the family of Ibn Abbas, one of Muhammad's uncles, made revolution against the Banu Umayyah, killed them all, slaughtered them all, and established a new caliphate, the Caliphate of Abbasids. Because the Ibn Abbas, Muhammad's uncle, is called Abbas, right? So the line coming from him is called Abbasids. A single person from Banu Umayyah managed to escape. His name was Abd el-Rahman, the servant of the merciful, and he went to Spain. And over there, he established the Umayyad kingdom, but not yet a parallel or alternative caliphate. So, by the middle of 8th century, we basically have a huge Islamic caliphate run now from Baghdad by the Abbasid Caliph, and we have the remnant of Banu Umayyah in Spain. At the same time, Berbers didn't, here in North Africa, they didn't really feel comfortable with the idea that Islam, as pure monotheism and so on, is so Arabocentric. And that even when they converted, they were not really usually given the promised equality. So this is the time. This is the time when a local Berber guy created his own Quran and created his own country, which was called Barghavata, and it only shows you how chaotic the things were, because the Caliph in Baghdad and the remnant of Umayyads in Spain could not really control the Atlantic path of North Africa, and an autonomous Berber kingdom, monotheistic, semi-Islamic, based on new Berber Quran, which is translation of the Quran from Arabic to Berber with certain additions. This country existed for 300 years and nobody was able to conquest them. Okay, now, we are proceeding slowly but surely. We need to understand the bigger picture in order to understand how does the Jewish community function within that world. So, by the end of the 9th century, a person called Ubayd Allah claims to be of Ali's and Fatima's origin, right? And he establishes here in Northern Africa a Shiite caliphate. However, though, as soon as they conquered Cairo, the Fatimid caliphate moves, the capital of the Fatimid caliphate moves to Cairo. Now there are two caliphs. It's impossible. Why? Because according to Islamic way of understanding the world, caliph is basically like the Pope. And you can't have two popes at the same time. Sometimes we did, right? With the crisis of Avignon and so on. But generally, you should have one caliph or you should have one pope. Abdul Rahman III, right? Because few guys already died and they had sons called after their grandfathers. Abdul Rahman III then recognizes that if you can have two caliphs, why not three? So he establishes his own caliphate. He proclaims not to be anymore Amir al-Muslimun, in other words, the commander of Muslims, but he proclaims to be Amir al-Muminun, right? The commander of believers, which is higher rank. He basically proclaims to be a caliph. Now we are having three caliphs at the same time. Two of them are Sunni, right? One in Baghdad is Sunni, one in Spain is Sunni. The Baghdad Caliph is Abbasid Caliph. The Spanish Caliph is Banu Umayyad Caliph. And then in Cairo we have a Fatimid. Why Fatimid? Because Muhammad's daughter is called Fatima. Okay. At this, even bit before, another Ashraf family. Now I will explain the term. Descendants of Muhammad's only daughter Fatima and her husband Ali are divided into two lines. Ali and Fatima had two sons, Hassan and Hussein. The sons of Hassan are titled as Sidi, in other words, Master or Lord, and sons of Hussein are titled Sharif. Together, they are called Ashraf. Together, they are called Sharifa. In other words, the Holy Family, right? The family of the Prophet himself. So, one person from Muhammad's own family, descendant of Ali, Fatima, Ali, and Hassan, gets to Morocco. His name is Idris. Later he will be called Mullah Idris. He came from a Shiite context. Coming to Morocco, which was already a Sunni, he saw that they will accept his leadership if he just, makes this internal conversion to Sunni Islam. So he does. And he establishes his own Sunni semi-caliphate. In other words, he's called again, just like at the beginnings of the caliphate in Spain, he is called Amir al-Muslimun. He's not called Amir al-Muminun. He's not called the commander of the believers, but he's called commander of the Muslims. In other words, commander of the local Muslim community. Harun al-Rashid, everybody knows him. The famous guy from Thousand Nights and Night. Harun al-Rashid is so upset that he sends an assassin to Morocco and he poisons Mullah Idris. A few years later, his son, Idris II, is proclaimed to be Amir al-Muslimun in Morocco, and he's called Idris II, and at the moment he's only 11 years old, which basically means that Morocco, Muslim Berbers ruled themselves, but they have a noble head of the state. Okay. Now, this is already the period of Moroccan Jewish history that we are more comfortable with, because it is becoming Jewish in the way we are trained to think about Judaism. In other words, they are becoming Talmudocentric, rabbinocentric, how would you call it? Group within Rabbinic Judaism. So, you remember the city which was created in Tunisia by Sidi Uqba. The city is called Kairouan, right? In this Kairouan, a yeshiva was established. And the Kairouan yeshiva basically took over the crown of the Babylonian yeshivat. So, we see, for example, that the last famous rabbis of the Babylonian yeshivot, Rav Sherira Gaon, right, beginning of 10th century, and then Rav Hai Gaon, the end of 10th century, they are already dependent on the yeshiva in Kairouan. Now, the people who learned in that yeshiva, and here we enter very interesting territory of folk tales within Rabbinical Judaism. The famous Ra'avad, not Ra'avad II, who wrote the commentary over Maimonides' Mishneh Torah, but Ra'avad I, Rabbi Abraham ibn Daud, Rabbi Abraham ben David. He wrote his famous Shalshelet HaKabbalah, or Sefer HaKabbalah, the book of tradition. And in that book, he tells us the story which was running in 12th century Spain when he lived. And he's basically telling us how the Torah moved from Israel to Babylon, and then from Babylon to North Africa, and then from North Africa to Spain. But at this very moment, not having better sources, he's using folk tale, which is called Sipur Arba'at Hashavuim. The story of the 4 captives. So the story says, 4 rabbis, Rabbi Shemaria ben Elchanan, Rabbi Hushiel ben Elchanan, Rabbi Moshe, and unidentified 4th rabbi, were taken captives by the Muslim, how would you call it, admiral of, yeah? How do you say admiral of, yeah, admiral, that's the English word. Okay. They didn't disclose that they were huge rabbis of their generation. So the first of them was sold in Egypt, in Alexandria, and he established rabbinic academies over there. The second of that was Rabbi Shemaria ben Elhanan. The second of them was sold to Kairouan. This is Rabbi Hushiel ben Elhanan. The third of them, Rabbi Moshe, was sold to Cordova. Sold, yeah, as a slave. To Cordova in Spain. Now, what happens? The Jewish community in Alexandria, I beg your pardon? The fourth one, nobody knew his name, so nobody knew where he ended. The idea, however, is that you need, and this is how the folk tale works, this is how the folk tradition works. You condensate, you concentrate historical phenomena into one single person. So instead of talking about economic reasons and political reasons and religious reasons that center moved from one place to another place, you actually put it all onto the shoulders of one single person, and as that person moves, the center moves with him. Right? So this is how the world Judaism at that moment, at least from the Spanish Jewish glasses, tried to understand decentralization of Jewish world from Babylon to these three new diaspora centers. Now, when I say that Rabbi Sharira Gaon and Rabbi Hai Gaon were obviously dependent on the new yeshiva in Kairouan, that's obvious from their letters. They were exchanging letters. Much of that is preserved in the Cairo Geniza, in the famous Geniza of Cairo. And you see in that exchange of letters that rabbis from Babylon are turning to rabbis in Kairouan, asking them to establish the supremacy of the Babylonian yeshivot in their new center. Now, one of the two. Either these people can do it, and then why should they do it for Babylon? They should do it for themselves. Or they cannot do it, but then why would you turn to them? So obviously they could do it. The Babylonian yeshivot believed they would do it, but they didn't shut their own leg. They preferred the local center to that of Babylonia. So theologically they proclaimed, they paid their lip service or allegiance to Babylonian yeshivot, but they've established a very firm Jewish center of learning. Now, who is in that center? Rabbeinu Hananel, who is the son of Rabbi Hushiel, Rabbeinu Yaakov, and his son Rabbeinu Nisim. And here we see for the first time in Jewish history democratization of Jewish texts. Babylonian yeshivot, and if we had a PowerPoint presentation, if we had means to show you the PowerPoint presentation, I would show you, but I can send it later through Dabi to everybody in the group. I would show you how at the beginning in the Babylonian yeshivot, it was basically from father to son, from father to son. So it was a tiny group, the heads of the yeshivot, two yeshivot, Surah and Pumbedita, and at certain times third yeshiva, Nehardea, and then Resh Galuta. So Resh Galuta, the head, the ethnarch, right? It was going from father to son, but also Rashuta Yeshivot was going from father to son. And basically everything was oral, and if you were not born into the rabbinic elite, you didn't even have access to those texts. Now in Kairouan, first time outside of the Babylon, they are giving texts for public use. Rabbeinu Hananel writes his commentary on Talmud. Rabbeinu Nisim, he writes his famous Sefer HaMafteach, which is basically disclosing to you the keys of understanding the Talmud. It's kind of encyclopedia, dictionary, He explains you basically the world of Talmud, the language of Talmud, and so on. Now, these two guys Rabbeinu Hananel and Rabbeinu Nissim had a famous pupil. His name was called Rabbi Yitzchak. Later he will be called Alfasi. Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi. Now what happens? Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi is born in North Africa. He is born in present-day Tunisia, in a small place, and he moves from there to Kairouan. He learns Talmud from Rabbeinu Nissim and Rabbeinu Hananel, and then the local Berber governor of Ifriqiya, which was basically part of the Fatimid Caliphate, of the Shiite Caliphate, they stopped paying taxes to Cairo, and they proclaimed to be Sunnis. So the Fatimid Caliph comes and destroys the city of Kairouan. And this is basically when Rabbi Yitzchak moves from Kairouan to Fez. And here is basically how the Moroccan Judaism was established as Rabbinic Judaism. Jews were all around for hundreds of years before that. But until you have a charismatic, learned, educated, erudite in all secrets of Torah, you couldn't basically speak of local yeshivot. There were local synagogues, people were coming, they were praying, they were chanting psalms, and they were going home. But then the yeshiva was established. So basically, Morocco over here, during the time of the Idrisid dynasty, established a city of Fez. And Morocco took advantage of the fact that in other two Islamic provinces were turmoils which were not happening in Morocco. So when Kairouan was destroyed by the Fatimids, the intellectual elite, not only the Jewish intellectual elite, the Muslim intellectual elite moves to Fez, and they have their own quarter, which is called Al-Kairouaniyun, the people of Kairouan. Then, at the same time, there are turmoils in Muslim Spain, in the Umayyad Muslim Spain. And then expulsees from there are coming to Fez, and they are establishing another quarter, which is called Al-Andalusiyun. And these two quarters basically functioned as two separate cities, right? And then only after that, they were reunited into one single city. Yes?
Sorry, which year are we talking about the establishment of Fez?
Establishment of Fez is before, but Fez started as a small caravan city, not...
No, when Rabbi came and started...
Oh, he moved, yeah, I understand the question. He moved to Fez in 1054. This is when Kairouan was destroyed, and this is when he moved to Fez. But things are not that simple. Because when he moved to Fez, Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, when he moved to Fez, he lived as a head of the local yeshiva for more or less 40 years. Then in 1088, he quarreled with a very potent, very powerful, very rich local Jew. And he needed to escape. Because the local Jew could basically harm him through the Muslim authorities. And this is how he went from Fez and established his yeshiva in Lucena, near Cordova. And then his famous pupil is Rabbi Yosef ibn Megas. One of the most famous pupils of Rabbi Yosef ibn Megas. Oh, at the same time, Rabbi Yosef ibn Megas and Yehuda Halevi. They are both Rif. Rif is Rabbi Yitzchak Fasi. So the acronym of the name is Rif. So Rif, when he moved to Spain, he had two famous pupils, amongst others, Rabbi Yosef ibn Megas and Yehuda Halevi. Rabbi Yosef ibn Megas had a very talented pupil called Maimon. This Rabbi Maimon had a very talented son called Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, or famous Maimonides. Now you can see how basically it is impossible to separate the Moroccan Jewish history from Spanish Jewish history. Because it's bidirectional, and all the time leadership is coming from Morocco to Spain, from Spain to Morocco, from Morocco to Spain, from Spain to Morocco. So it's all intertwined all the time. Okay. In any case, in 788, the Moroccan Idrisid state starts. 803, the Idris II, 11 years old kid, is brought to power and proclaimed to be Moroccan king. In 1031. Now, Berbers proved through history to be very unruly. They were very good in conquering space, but they were bad in ruling others, and they certainly couldn't be ruled themselves. So, most of the time, Berbers provided fresh blood to Muslim dynasties all over. Their history is basically very comparable to that of their present history is very comparable to that of the Kurds, right? Because they are a minority in all northern African countries. There is 40% Berbers in Morocco, there is 29% Berbers in Algiers, there is only 1% of Berbers in Tunisia today, but they didn't constitute majority of any single North African state today. However, though, at those times, Berbers were taken as good warriors. Islamic society, the Umayyad Islamic society in Spain, was becoming decadent. And it's very easy to explain. A Muslim kid in Umayyad Spain cost $1 million. They had good schools, expensive schools. They didn't make too many children because the hygiene was on a high level, medicine was on high level, life standard was on high level. So they didn't have to produce 10 kids in order to survive. They could immediately produce 2 kids and have 2 of their kids go to university. Now, if a kid in a rural area costs you $100,000 from the day he's born until he's 18, in Umayyad Spain, the kid costs you $1 million. Now, when you invest $1 million in your kid, you don't want him to die. Certainly, you don't want him to die fighting some barbarian Christians coming from the north. So what do? You take Berber warriors and you take them to Muslim Spain. This proved to save and destroy Muslim Spain few times subsequently. So the end of Umayyad Muslim Spain, but not yet of the Muslim Spain altogether, is when the majority of the soldiers in the Umayyad Spain were Berbers. They were looked down by the local Muslims, and then they made an uprisal, and how do you call it, coup d'etat. And in 1031, the Umayyad Spain was finished. So it becomes the kingdom of taifas, the kingdom of different groups, of different tribes. And the same happens in Morocco. The Berber state here collapses just the way the Berbers made the Umayyad Spain collapse. Now, in Morocco, in Greater Morocco, we are basically speaking of 7 dynasties. This is where Berber history is uncomparable to that of the Kurds, for example. Because out of 7 dynasties, out of 7 local Moroccan dynasties, 4 were Berber and 3 were Arab. Obviously, the first one, the Idrisid, was Arab. They were coming from the family of the Prophet. But then the subsequent 4 were all of them local, Berber. The Al-Murabitun, right? Then later Al-Muwahidun. Then later Banu Marin, or Marinids. And then later the Wattasids. And then only after that we are coming to 2 additional Arab Sharifian dynasties. In other words, not only Arab, but also from Muhammad's own family. First one is the second one is the Sayyids, and the third one is the present one. The Alawites, and they came to power in 1666, and they are still running the show. Right? Okay. So, what's happening? Umayyad Spain falls down, the Idrisid state over here collapses. There are more and more Berber tribes who feel equally Muslim as Arabs, and they don't feel being ruled by Arabs. Now, what do you do when you are a part of a culture which claims to be equalist, but basically is not? How, and you yourself are trained to think of a prophet as of the best of divine creation in the world. And then his family is obviously holy. But on the other side, you don't really feel like being ruled by anybody else. So how do you deal with this tension as a convert to a strongly ethnic religion? Early Islam was an ethnic faith, right? It was an Arab faith. For God's sake, it was given in Arabic by Arabs to Arabs. So how do you deal with it? There are two ways. Theoretically, there are two ways. Either you become heterodox. In other words, just like the Persians could not tolerate the idea of nomadic, barbaric Arabs, just because the Nabi happened to be born, the Prophet happened to be born amongst them, that now they should run the world and take the precedence over the Persians who have had the long history and huge culture. So what did they do? They opted for the minority group in Islam, the Shiites. So the first Persian Empire was not Shiite at all. This was a political decision. The political decision of, we will now take the minority position in Islam, we will invest our energy into it, but we will be working for ourselves and not for the Arabs. The same happens in the North Africa. I said there are two recipes of dealing with Arab dominance in Islamic world. One is to become heterodox, in other words, to belong to another school, to differ from Arabs by the very theological interpretation of Islam. And another one is to be more Sunni than the Arabs themselves. You see? So different Berber dynasties in Morocco adopted one or second option. So, Al-Murabitun. Al-Murabitun is the first local dynasty. And Al-Murabitun are basically running the show from 1060 until 1145. Okay? So it's even less than 100 years. Where does their name comes from? Rabita in Arabic means connection. It's the connection of God to Prophet, of Prophet to Ali, of Ali to different Imams and Sufi Sheikhs, and from them to the believers. So Al-Murabitun are basically the connected ones. What happened? Most of the Berbers by the time were only formally converted to Islam. One of the local leaders goes to Hajj, to Mecca. On his way, he comes through the third holy city in Islam. Today they call it Jerusalem. But at that time, Kairouan was much holier for Muslims. And the Kairouan was believed to be the third holy city. Mecca, Medina, and Kairouan. So this guy, on his way back, comes to Kairouan. In Kairouan, he is exposed to learned Islam. And he sees how huge difference is between the folk Islam practiced in his tribe and the learned Islam of the books. So he brings, from Kairouan, he brings, basically in Kairouan he receives the recommendation to invite somebody from Dar al-Murabitun. In southern Morocco, there was this yeshiva, there was this Islamic monastery / school, madrasa, but it was madrasa and zawiya at the same time. And from there, he is sent Ibn Yasin. This guy provides the ideology. One of the strong tribes accepts his ideology. They impose it on everybody else. They conquer everybody else. And this is how the kingdom of Al-Murabitun, the connected ones, those connected with God, is established. And they established the city of Marrakesh. The city of Marrakesh also started as a military campus. And within 100 years it converted into really imperial city. But then in Atlas, another group called Al-Muwahidun, the pure monotheists. Muwahid in Arabic is the one who insists on oneness of God. So in Islam, if you want to conquer, or if you want a pretext to kill and plunder, you need to proclaim that the other group that you are taking issue with are either non-monotheist or Islamic heretics, and then they can just be exterminated. So this is exactly what Al-Muwahidun are saying about the Al-Murabitun. They say, we are the real monotheists, while you guys are heretics. Why you are heretics? They didn't believe in any Trinity. They didn't believe in any female divinities around. So why would they be called heretics? Being the fact that Al-Murabitun believed in literal interpretation of Quran. And then, just like in the Torah, in Quran, the hand of God is mentioned, and the ear of God is mentioned, and the eye of God is mentioned. The Al-Murabitun believed and taught that God has a human form. Al-Muwahidun took that one particular idea, proclaimed that the entire system was heretical one, and they've established the new kingdom. They've made the revolution, they killed the Al-Murabitun, and they've established their own kingdom, which lasted from 1145 to 1248. Again, a bit more than 100 years. For Jewish history, this was extremely important period. Unfortunately, extremely hard period also. Al-Murabitun were invited by different Spanish kings to help them fight the Reconquista of the Christians. Al-Murabitun took over, basically, they took over the Muslim Spain. But they were tolerant towards the Jews in Spain. When Al-Muwahidun took over Morocco, they took over Muslim Spain also, because the army in Muslim Spain was Berber. And Al-Muwahidun just abolished Judaism and Christianity in one single day by the royal decree, right? What happened is that Abd al-Mumin, the second ruler of the dynasty, he just decided no more tolerance, zero tolerance, especially in Spain. Why? Because Spain was problematic, it was shaky, Jews were very intellectual, very influential, very rich, and so on. So what happens is, they abolished Judaism in by a decree. Tomorrow morning, if you are caught exercising your Judaism publicly, you are to be exterminated. This is the time when many of the rabbinic leaders are leaving Spain, but they don't feel like going to Christian countries. Some did, but not the rabbis. The rabbis, basically, the Spanish rabbis felt much more comfortable in Islamic culture than in Christian culture. So Maimonides, compelled from without to dress as a Muslim and to act as a Muslim, his family, he's a young lad, but the family leaves Cordova and they come to Fez. And in present-day Fez, they have a house which they show you and they tell you this is the house where Maimonides lived. This is possible, not probable, certainly not provable. In any case, Maimonides and his family moved from here to Cairo. Why? Because Cairo was controlled by Fatimids, so they could return to Judaism openly. It was another Islamic country, right? But when he comes there, I think everybody knows that story. When he comes to Egypt, his Judaism or his Islamism is questioned. A person goes to a court, to Islamic court, and he says, I met this person in Morocco, and he was Muslim. Now, Muslim law is once Muslim, always a Muslim. You can't, once, even if you were Jewish or Christian, once you accept Islam, you can't return to your previous DOS or Windows 3.11 unless you want to be killed, because this is considered to be apostasy. However, though, the Ayyubi Salah ad-Din, who took over the power in Egypt, considered his personal doctor, Maimonides, to be too valuable to be killed for not being a good Muslim. And this serious charge was, by royal decree, was taken away from him. But this influenced Rambam's or Maimonides' position on Jewish law for decades to come. When a similar thing happened in the Shiite Yemen, and the local Shiite leader compelled the Jews to convert to Islam. So these Jews didn't know what to do. Are they supposed to die on Kiddush Hashem, to die for sanctification of divine name, or just to pretend to be Muslims and live there, or to pretend to be Muslims and then move someplace else? Two different positions, and this is very important, that's why I'm standing up. Two different positions were taken up on the issue in the Jewish world. The Ashkenazi rabbis, who didn't know much about Islam and lived in Christian society, now converting to Christianity from the point of view of rabbinical Judaism is extremely problematic. There are three things in Judaism that you are basically supposed to get yourself killed in order not to do them. They are idolatry, right? Incest, and homicide. In other words, if somebody puts a gun next to your head and he says, either worship idols or I will kill you, according to rabbinical Judaism, you should rather die. If you don't, nobody can press charges. Nobody can turn you to earthly court and say this person worshipped idols. Why? Because you didn't do it on your free will. And in order to be punished in Judaism, you need free will. So rabbinic Judaism leaves this to the heavenly court. God is the only one who knows whether you really submitted to the idol or not. The second thing is, if somebody puts a gun next to your head and says, either kill him or I will kill you, you should rather get yourself killed than kill another person. However, though, if you kill another person, again, you can't be persecuted by the earthly court. And the third thing is incest. If somebody tells you to sleep with your mother, with your daughter-in-law, with any married woman, or I will kill you, you should get yourself killed, but not do it. Still, if you do it, no earthly court can punish you. Now, why is this important? Most of the rabbis, most of the time, considered Christianity to be idolatry. Therefore, if you convert to Christianity, you actually lose the world to come. Now, the average human life was 40, 50, 60 years. So if you are caught in 40th year, right, and then you convert to Christianity, and then you lose the eternity, from the point of view of rabbinical Judaism, it's better to lose 10 years. You won't have any more than that anyways. So you lose your additional 5 years, your additional 10 years, your additional 15 years, and you just die, and then you have the entire eternity to take, how do you call it, to take interest on that investment. Now, they didn't know much about Islam, so they believed that same rules should be applied to Islam. And we know of thousands of Ashkenazi Jews who died for sanctification of God's name, of divine name, during the Crusades. They were offered either to convert or to die, and they died. And people throw their children from windows, and people kill themselves, or kill their wives in order for them to be raped by the Christian mob, and so on. So the Ashkenazi rabbis now are giving advice to Yemenite Jews, and they are telling them, die and don't convert. And then Maimonides, who himself underwent similar experience, he writes his famous Igeret Hashmad, the Epistle of Apostasy. And he says, converting to Islam doesn't constitute a major offense under the Jewish law. The Muslims are pure monotheists, and only thing you are required to say when converting to Islam is Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan Rasulullah. I believe that there is no God but one, and that Muhammad is his prophet, is his servant and prophet. So Maimonides says, we share with them the first half of the sentence, and the second half of the sentence is just notoriously stupid, false testimony. But you are not required to die in order not to utter notoriously stupid, false testimony. Just accept by your lips that Muhammad is the prophet and move yourself as soon as possible from that country. This was the Maimonides ruling. It was based on his own experience. If Maimonides was to die on Kiddush Hashem, Judaism wouldn't look the same way it does today. So he was saving lives of numerous Jews, but again, the considerations were strictly halakha. Maimonides himself would rather die than convert to Christianity. Okay, so we need to end. It was mission impossible to start with. I could never give you an impression of Moroccan Judaism in a single hour, but what we know by now, and we will proceed. We will have four additional lectures, and besides that, I will be on the bus with you all the time, so individually or as a group, you can always ask if I can really help you understand better the country and the Jewish community within it. In any case, one thing that we need to underline, because I will need it as a spring for the future lectures, is that the Sharifian nature of the Moroccan state. Sharifian, in other words, the state, since 1666, is run by Muhammad's descendants. And yes, 1666. The country is basically run on four. What do you think? Why there was no Arabic Spring in Morocco? In different presidential, democratical Arab states, there was. In Morocco, there was none. Majority of the people are not interested in that. There are four things. One thing is Sharafa. The king is descendant of the Prophet. Second thing is Baraka. The king has innate blood sanctity. The third thing is Amir al-Mu'minun. He's believed to be the commander of the believers. Right? And the fourth thing is Bayram. Once a year, everybody in Morocco swears allegiance to the king, and this resembles the tradition of the Prophet and so on. This will prove to be extremely important for us to understand the way the Moroccan Jews function, because these things, some of them, like Baraka, were transplanted from general Moroccan Muslim society to the Jewish community. And this is why, and we will learn about that, or we will discuss that, we will speak about that, why there is such an extreme phenomena of veneration of saints in Morocco, why only in Morocco, in entire Eastern Jewish world, I will not compare that to Hasidism because it develops in totally different circumstances, but in entire Eastern Jewish world, only here you have saintly rabbinic families in which, even if personally you are accused of criminal act. You remember the story of Baba Baruch in Israel? The son of Baba Sali, right? So he was accused of criminal act. Still, however, everybody considered him to be a saint. Why? Because he has the holy blood. How does that work? The folk belief is, if the barakah happens in the family for 3 subsequent times, later on, it doesn't matter what you do personally. You could stain it, right? you could make it dirty, but your innate blood sanctity is internal, intrinsic part of you. Okay, let's stop here and then we'll proceed later.
Okay, when you go back, please use the bathroom because the next battle will be 1.5 hours from